here's the interesting thing. You know, Avatar had so many, you know, kind of broad vistas, if you will, that the difference between watching the movie in 2D and in 3D is not that great, because the more expansive the image, the less you feel in close contact with objects and people and characters and so on. So it's the intimate scenes in Avatar where just a couple of people are talking, Jake and Neytiri or whatever, or going through the jungle with close pass-bys of plants and things like that, that were really the most effective in 3D, not the big wide flying shots, the broad canvas stuff, the big battle scenes. So we knew that going in, that the difference between experiencing Sanctum in 2D and in 3D would actually be much greater, because the 3D would constantly be informing you in the experience of watching a movie with the sense of claustrophobia. 3D works best in small spaces. For instance, anything more than 20, 30 feet away has very little 3D impact, you know, up on a movie screen, or in real life, really. Even as far away as you're sitting, I'm already not really seeing in 3D, but I see the people in the front row very clearly stereoscopically. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we knew that the claustrophobia of the film and the medium in which we were working would work together really well to constantly give the audience that feeling. And I think, you know, we've done test screenings and we've seen that there's a palpable kind of white knuckle sense of anxiety in watching the movie, which is exactly what we want to create. You know, usually when you go to a movie, your consciousness kind of floats above the film. 3D sucks you in and makes it a visceral experience. And I think 3D and this type of film go perfectly well together.
And what about
the other thing about a survival story is you want the audience to project themselves into the characters and really feel physically present, and then you just ratchet up the tension.
What about all the falling water? How does that I mean, what we saw today looks pretty amazing in 3D.
Yeah. Yeah, it works well. I mean, they had to go through, you guys had to jump through some real hoops to keep the cameras dry and to keep the splashes from affecting, because if you splash one lens and not the other, it creates problems in the 3D. So they had to go to school on a steep learning curve to learn how to work in water, below water, and above water, which I think the above water, just above the interface, when you've got a lot of water splashing and being thrown at you by hoses and dump tanks and stuff, is actually harder in a way than working underwater, which is much more controlled. It's slow, but it's very controlled.
This question is for everyone. Could you elaborate on the casting of the film and what kind of qualities you were looking for in actors?
Well, it's an Australian film, so we have an Australian cast. That was the first thing. We're going to make the film in Australia. Without going into details, the financing and so on, part of the structure of that was, you know, most of the team had to be an Australian team. So we had a look at the actors that we really liked, and in the end we settled on Richard Roxburgh as our main lead actor. He's probably Australia's best known actor, and probably known as Australia's best actor as well, as from a quality standpoint. We're very, very lucky that we got him in our picture, because I think he brings a real gravitas to the role, and in lesser hands it might have started to feel a bit plastic, but so he's wonderful. So in terms of a process, basically Andrew and I sort of cast through Australia. Jim at that time was involved in a small picture in New Zealand. So we would basically just try and send Jim our ideas and say, look, have a look at this guy's test, we like him, we think he's good for this role. In fact, I remember Rhys, you saw Rhys's test.
Yeah, my response to Rhys was pretty instantaneous.
And he was great, wasn't he? And he was, I think ironically, he was actually in LA at the time and put a test down for us in LA, sent it to Australia, we sent it back here. But we looked at, you know, in terms of for the young boy role, the Josh role, we looked at pretty much every actor in Australia and almost anywhere else. I mean, really, we really kind of looked at everyone, didn't we, around the world in a lot of ways.
It was a tough one to cast, because we wanted someone who had that youthful appearance that could transform into, you know, his journey becoming a man in the film, but be old enough and had enough acting experience to give us the performance. So you kind of end up with a guy who's around in his 20s who you want to look about 17 or 18. They're hard to find, you know.
Who ultimately is going to get to a spot that you believe his transition to a maturer man sort of figure, you know, take on the attributes of his father in the story. So it was a tricky thing to find, and Rhys, it's a fascinating thing when you're casting, and sometimes you just turn it on and the guy's there and it's just like, that's the guy, you know. and he was one of those guys, you know.